And joining us now is Arizona politics reporter Mary Jo Pitzl with the Arizona Republic. And Mary Jo, you've been covering school choice program in Arizona since its inception there. What can you tell us about how Arizona has set up their school choice program, how it's funded, who operates it, and really who's eligible?
School choice, or the voucher program, which is called the Empowerment Scholarship Account Program, has been around for a long time. It started about 12 years ago with the goal of using state dollars to support children who have disabilities and special needs that weren't being fully met by the public schools. These are a lot of specialty schools to deal with children who have special needs. Over the years, it grew a little bit, sort of almost every year. You would add, well, why don't we do this for foster kids? Why don't we do this for children of military? Well, if one kid in a family is already in the program, then we should let the siblings in, even if maybe they're not disabled. So it kept growing until it got to the point that lawmakers said the planets aligned. It said, why don't we just open this up to everybody? This is a popular program. It gives parents ultimate choice because they decide where they want those school dollars spent. They pick the school, whether that be a home school, a private school, and of course they can always stay in the public schools. So in 2022, like I said, the planets sort of aligned. You had the governor really pushing to get universal vouchers through. It was his last year in office, and he wanted this as one of his capstone accomplishments. And you had a Republican-controlled legislature, and they voted to expand the program to what we now call universal vouchers, which means it's open to any school-age child in Arizona. At the time, there were about 12,000 kids in the program. Today, the current enrollment is 83,032 kids. So it's been incredibly popular because of that expansion to universal.
83,000 children taking advantage of this voucher program. How does that compare to the public school, the public school population?
The public school population is about just a little bit over 1 million.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it's obviously far more children in public school, but some of these are students who had been in public schools, and once it went universal, switched over, or their parents switched them over. But the real growth in the program are the kids who are just starting their school years. The 5-year-old who's going to go to kindergarten, and the curve shows that many of those just never go. They go straight to a voucher program and probably will not ever enter public schools, or perhaps will not go to public school until much later in their academic career. So what we're seeing is we have school districts, especially on the elementary level, that are seeing a drop in enrollment. In fact, just this week, a school district that's in one of the more affluent parts of the Phoenix area said it's probably going to have to close 2 of its 5 elementary schools because of enrollment drops. And a lot of that is due to the voucher program. There are other factors as well, changing demographics, where people live, et cetera. But the voucher program is seen as a big reason for that. So that hurts public schools because they lose a kid here, a kid there, and over time you just can't sustain keeping all of your schools open because of that enrollment loss.
And schools are gaining their funding based off of enrollment, correct, in Arizona?
Yes, yeah, primarily that and property tax.
And property tax, okay. So what has been the greater impact on public schools? You talked about one affluent school district closing 2 elementary schools. Is that a similar story statewide, or is that a rare occurrence?
I think it's the beginning of, I think, a trend. We've seen another school district in a much less economically advantaged community in the southern part of the Phoenix area, and they're closing 5 elementary schools. Again, there's a combination of reasons, but a lot of it is due to families down there choosing to use the voucher program. So again, you're losing enrollment in those classrooms. So we'll see what happens. As I said, it appears that the growth in the program comes from kids just starting to get into the school system and get into their school years. If that maintains, well, then over time, you are going to see an erosion in the public schools.
What kind of students are we seeing benefit from this program? Is it a socioeconomic, pattern?
Mhm.
Is it kind of all across Arizona, or is it certain families taking advantage or able to take advantage?
Well, it's sort of hard to tell because this program does not have a lot of reporting requirements. But in the fall of 22, when the program opened up for everybody, there was a real surge of uh, children who have already been in public schools receiving voucher money. So that could supplement or perhaps even cover the entire private tuition bill. That caused a lot of outrage because these were people who already somehow were finding the means to send their children to a private school. And now all of a sudden they can take advantage of the voucher program, but that's what it was set up for. So that was the first surge, but that has somewhat calmed down. And the it, it's hard, it's just very hard to tell exactly, where, well, demographically how this is playing out. I mentioned that pretty well-to-do school district in the northern part of the Phoenix area. Well, those are pretty well-to-do families. What we're not seeing is a lot of children. The intent here, I should back up to say, is the intent was to give choice, particularly to people who felt that their children were trapped in bad schools with poor instruction and sort of code words for economically distressed areas. And it's not clear that that's the kids that are being served by this program. We have a lot of pretty well-to-do families and median income families in the program as best we can tell. But that's the parental choice, and the public seems to be generally fine with that.
Well, in Texas, of course, the question always is how much money can each student become eligible for? So how is it set up in Arizona? How much money can a student receive in this program, and where's that money coming from?
Sure. The program is set up so that any student who gets a voucher gets 90% of the amount of money that would be paid to a child who would go to a public charter school. And in Arizona, charter schools get more money per student than a child who is in a district public school, but it's still all public dollars. So you get 90% of what's going to a charter school. The average amount right now is about, I'm checking my notes, $9,800 per student per year. The median, though, is closer to $7,400 because you have a lot of children. Well, you have the children that are in the special needs category have much more expensive needs and different kinds of equipment and teaching modalities that are needed. That really drives up the cost. So voucher students who are in handicapped, have special needs, can get upwards to 30, whatever they need, 30, $40,000 a year in assistance. But the average is $7,400. I'm sorry, the average is $9,800 per student, which is less than the per pupil allotment for the public schools.
Okay. Well, looking at this, is there still a fight at the Arizona state capitol with school vouchers? And now there's a Democratic governor in power there in Arizona. But do you see this fight continuing? Do you see the school voucher program growing, if it can grow anymore, or maybe shrinking in the future?
At the state capitol, this is really divided along party lines. As you mentioned, Arizona elected a Democrat as governor 2 years ago, and she came in saying, I want to abolish the program. We need to get rid of this. It's harming public education. That was a non-starter. She had a Republican legislature to work with, and there was no way that that was going to happen. So after her first year, she came back and said, okay, what we really need to do is put some guardrails on this program. We need some accountability. We don't know how these children aren't required to take standardized tests. We don't know what kind of education they're getting. We don't know if the teachers, we don't know if these are safe schools. There's no screening process, for example, fingerprinting teachers before they're allowed to work with kids in the classroom. There were a bunch of ideas put forward on how to sort of, as they called it, reining in the program. That went nowhere. I think the inclination from our legislature, which remains after the elections in Republican control, is that they're fine with the program the way that it is. But I must admit that there are, it seems like every other week, some story pops up about some extraordinary expense using the voucher program that, you scratch your head and other people are like, why the heck are we spending our money on this?
Hmm.
Just yesterday, the State Board of Education heard appeals from some families that they were applying for reimbursement of their expenses. Arizona allows families, or basically requires them, if you're homeschooling or you want to do some supplemental education, your kid can't be in public school. You have to go provide the materials or the experience and then bill the voucher program. There was one family that bought 3 dune buggies for their children, arguing that they were autistic and they needed this kind of kinesthetic learning to boost their learning ability. They paid about, I think, $30,000 upwards per dune buggy for children. The State Board of Education denied it and said, yeah, it's a little outside of the idea of what we were thinking about here with the voucher program. The family appealed it. They lost that appeal. Another family had spent $16,000 on a cello for their child. They were looking for reimbursement. That was denied. We later learned that family intended to put their child back into public school with a taxpayer paid cello. So these kind of things pop up. Once in a while, the stories go on and on and on about the kinds of things that voucher dollars are being used for that leave a lot of people wondering why, pianos and driving lessons.
Sure.
If you can tie it to a curriculum and make the argument that it's educational, there's a good chance that it will be approved.
Yeah, it sounds like people are finding loopholes in the system. We know that politicians are divided by it, down party lines, but just everyday Arizonans, the general public, what sense do you get of how they feel about it? Do you think a majority of the general public is positive toward school voucher program?
Well, I think that's something that a lot of people don't pay attention to unless you're in that school age child demographic, that time in your life when you're really paying attention. I would say that they probably are, because we haven't seen much support for efforts to roll this back. There was a petition drive, a citizen initiative drive 2 years ago that aimed to do just that. They couldn't get enough signatures. They didn't have the manpower and I guess the organization to make that happen. So if you use that as a barometer of public sentiment about this, I guess people are okay with it.
Mary Jo Pitzl with the Arizona Republic, I appreciate your time and your insight into this. Thank you so much for coming on.
Sure. Thanks for inviting me.